Recently, a guy named Zach Bitter, who's a high school teacher in Michigan, set a record for running 100 miles. He did it on a track, by the way, around it, 400 laps. But he ran 100 miles in 11 hours and 47 minutes and set a U.S. record. The guy in the middle is Sergeant Mike Morton in the U.S. Army. He's 43 years old, and he's set an American record for 24 hours, and he ran 172 miles in 24 hours on a low-carb fueling strategy. Donald O'Neill, who lives here in Cape Town and had done the movie Serial Killers 1 with Professor Noakes a couple of years ago, and he came out and chronicled a trans-Pacific row by Sami Inken and his wife Meredith Loring. They got in a rowboat in California, rowed to Hawaii in 45 days, unsupported, so no resupply in the middle. And the previous record for a two-person boat from California to Hawaii was 60 days, and they did it in 45 days, taking 15 days off the all-time record, and they did it on a low-carb diet. Now, people will say, oh, that's great, Steve, but we know athletes will be willing to do anything to set a record, to get a medal. They use drugs like amphetamines that runners and cyclists have died by taking drugs because they want to enhance performance. And we all know that these people will do anything, even if it threatens their life. So maybe they're doing this, but it's going to kill them earlier in life. Is it dangerous? So I want to show you one study that was run by Jeff Volek's group. And I want to address some of the questions of danger. So he took a group of 40 people with metabolic syndrome, that's pre-diabetes, and he divided them into two groups. One group of 20 was put on a low-fat and low-saturated fat diet. You can't really see it, I'm sorry, that's up here. And the other group was on a low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet, and particularly high in saturated fats. And we did that on purpose. Low-fat diet was about 1,500 calories a day, and it was 56% carbohydrate, about 20% protein, and only 24% fat. So it's quite low fat, and it contained specifically 12 grams of saturated fat per day. The high-fat, low-carb diet was a little higher in protein, 28%, about 12% carbs, and 59% fat. But again, it was 1,500 calories a day, and people say, well, that isn't really that high. Remember, Stephenson was eating 75 or 80%. But remember, this is 1,500 calories. These people are burning more than that. So a lot of their calories are coming from body fat. So actually what the body is burning is more than 59%. But the important point is 36 grams of saturated fat per day in this group, 12 grams of saturated fat per day in this group, and very big differences in the amount of carbohydrate. This shows you the weight loss for the two groups, and the dietary records there, or the dietary intakes. And as we typically see, and Dr. Westman has published multiple studies, and others have published studies of comparing these two diets for 3 months or 6 months or a year, you typically see more weight loss with the low-carb diet. And people say, well, it's just water weight. Well, in the first week or two, the water weights differ. But once you get out here, you get substantial differences in fat weight. So this is greater fat loss here than here. But what happens to the risk parameters? So-called bad cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, went up with the ketogenic, the low-carb diet, and went down with the low-fat diet. But these are very small changes on average in the LDL, and they were not statistically significant. LDL particle size is very important, and a 3% increase in LDL particle size is actually a highly significant difference, which means it reduces risk. HDL, the good cholesterol, went up markedly here, much more so than over here. Triglycerides, which are another measure of risk, and particularly are markedly elevated with metabolic syndrome, they cut their triglycerides in half with the low-carbohydrate diet. There is no drug that I can prescribe you as a physician that would get anything like this change in HDL and the reduction in triglycerides. But really the most intriguing thing was something that we have done in 3 studies now, this one and 2 others, and has not been looked at before, and that is we measured the amount of saturated fat in the bloodstream. Now, we've all been told that you are what you eat. In fact, every dietitian is brainwashed to think in his or her training that what you eat is what you get in the body. But it turns out that, and as you've already seen today, saturated fat in the diet has been disconnected from heart disease risk in multiple large studies. But there is a grain of truth in the concept that saturated fat is dangerous. There is very strong data that saturated fat circulating in your blood is dangerous. What's been disconnected is dietary intake from saturated fat. And what we showed here is that for the low-carb ketogenic diet, even though they were eating 3 times as much saturated fat per day as this group here, these numbers came down, which is saturated fat and the triglycerides is percent, and this is the absolute amount. These reductions are much greater than these over here, which means that in spite of the fact they're eating much more saturated fat, they have less in their blood. That seems like a major paradox until you understand that we have dramatically enhanced these people's ability to burn fat for fuel. And the saturated fat becomes a high-octane fuel of the body, and they burn it up, it doesn't accumulate, and it doesn't represent risk. Turns out that a well-formulated low-carb diet is very effective at reducing inflammation, and inflammation has become a major target in preventing not just heart disease and diabetes, but now multiple common kinds of cancer in humans, and interestingly also Alzheimer's disease and late dementia in people. And that's getting a whole lot of attention. And to show you what the difference is between where I learned about ketosis in medical school, and that was as a physician in the context of ketoacidosis, which occurs in type 1 diabetics when you don't give them insulin. And ketoacidosis is way over here on this side in red, and the number for ketone in the blood, the measurement is 10 units or greater. That's ketoacidosis. If you woke up this morning and had your toast and oatmeal and juice for breakfast, your ketones would be down here under 0.2 units, 0.2 millimolar. So a person fed carbohydrates consistently down here. A person who is in ketoacidosis up here. If you go on total starvation, you eat no calories, just have water and a vitamin pill for a couple weeks, your values would be up here in the range of 5 to 7 millimolar. And starvation ketosis has been studied for over a century, and as long as you don't take it on too long because you're wasting lean tissue, if you don't eat protein, so ketones don't protect you from losing lean tissue unless you have protein with it. So total starvation out here is perfectly safe for up to a month or more, except that you're losing lean tissue. And lean tissue means you're losing structure and you're losing strength and function. This is a little complex, but I just want to get this across because this is a rapidly moving field and it's moving in a very interesting direction. So what I just told you is we store fat in our fat cells, we transport that fat to the liver through the bloodstream, the liver makes it into ketones, the ketones come out into the bloodstream from the liver, and 300 to 600 calories a day goes to the brain to feed the brain. It also turns out that the digestive tract, your intestines don't like to burn glucose. They like to burn short-chain fats. So if you eat a high carbohydrate diet, you have to eat fiber so that the bacteria inside you can eat up that fiber, turn it into short-chain fats to feed your intestine. But if you're an Inuit who, even if you believe they harvested, lichens and really sour berries and stuff and ate them in the summer for vegetables, but for 9 months a year they lived on snow and ice. There was no gatherable plant food. They had no obvious source of fiber in their diet. And how did they maintain intestinal health for that 9 months? And it turns out that very likely beta-hydroxybutyrate circulating in the blood coming from the liver is actually an excellent fuel for the blood. And multiple groups have made the observation that people with irritable bowel syndrome, which is quite common, the people with irritable bowel syndrome frequently see dramatic improvement, if not complete remission of that syndrome when they go on a well-formulated ketogenic diet, which means the liver is feeding the gut and the gut is happy under those circumstances. That's still a hypothesis, it's not proven, but I thought I'd dangle it out there because if you have IBS, it's really great to make it go away. But the really exciting thing that's happened is we now, just in the last couple of years, based on a remarkable paper published in the journal Science, and by the way, the journal Science is probably hands down the best and most dependable in terms of quality research. It stands the test of time. A little over 2 years ago, a group from San Francisco published a paper saying that beta-hydroxybutyrate is a signal that goes directly to the nucleus of the cell and changes the activity of a specific set of genes called histone deacetylases, and we won't have a test afterwards. The histone deacetylases control how your body defends itself against free radicals, what we call oxidative stress. When you have ketones circulating, you basically turn on your defenses against oxidative stress and free radicals. which means it's like it's taking a super potent antioxidant pill, except it's coming from inside you. Now let's flip this thing over and say, when our more recent ancestors adopted agriculture and started producing lots of carbohydrates, and we ate those carbohydrates and we had our toast and oatmeal and orange juice for breakfast, that made our ketones go really low. We didn't get this signal, and our defenses against oxidative stress got turned off. And maybe that's why we have to take antioxidants and eat spinach. What Aboriginal person would choose to eat spinach? In recent papers, defense against oxidative stress, stabilization of things called mast cells, which are involved in allergy and asthma. And we see a lot of people with upper airway disease get better on a low-carb diet. So you put stuff in the little petri dishes you grow them in and see if it makes them live longer. And people have been, the holy grail of the drug industry is to find a longevity drug, something that makes these things live longer, that doesn't have toxic side effects, and we can feed it to people and make people live longer. Well, they put beta-hydroxybutyrate in the culture medium, and they live 26% longer. 26% increase in longevity. We're not talking about ketoacidosis, we're talking about nutritional ketosis. It's not dangerous. And then we come to the question of, how do you do it? I want to just alert you to the fact that not all low carbohydrate diets are ketogenic. That the more carbohydrate you eat, the less ketones you produce. That's going up vertically. The more protein you eat, the less ketones you produce. And if you look at the range of diets that we eat, at the upper side here is the Ornish diet. I don't know if you know about that, but it's a doctor in California who believes that a basically vegan diet with very low in fat, involved with including exercise and meditation and stress relief, is the ideal diet for all humans. And there are people who thrive on this diet. What we call the standard American diet, but when I went to low carb down under, we called it the standard Australian diet. And this is the industrialized, refined, high refined sugar and fat diet, sugar and carbohydrate and seed oil diet up there. A Mediterranean diet is just kissing on the top side of a low carbohydrate diet. The paleo diet over here tends to be about 30% protein. And the only way you can get into ketosis dependably is to stay under 10% carbohydrate and maybe up to a little over 20% of protein. And this is daily energy expenditure, by the way. And what's not shown here is fat, but if you add up the carb and the protein, then the difference is fat. And so if you're here at 20% and 10%, that would be 20% protein, 10% carb, and that means this has to be a 70% fat diet in order for you to sustain this and be weight stable. Because we're not talking just about weight loss, we're talking about a long-term lifestyle. And yes, if you want to lose weight, you go on the diet, as Dr. Westman told you, you're going to lose your cravings, your appetite's going to go down, and you'll be happy eating less. And many people lose a lot of weight quite promptly on this kind of diet. Not because it melts away the fat, it means it gives you a much better control over your intake so that you can achieve your goal of losing weight. And let's kind of look at that, because this is important. It's not one diet, say, here, eat this, and Dr. Westman, to his credit, gives you page 4, which has the things you can eat, and says eat enough of these as much as you want. But he doesn't say eat exactly this many grams and that many grams. But what I want to point out here is if you want to lose some weight, let's say you're a woman who weighs 90 kilograms, 200 pounds, and you want to go on a low-carb diet and you would desire to lose some weight. If you go on this diet and your cravings and your appetite are markedly reduced, then even though you're burning 2,800 calories a day, you might only take in 1,400 calories a day. And that would give you a deficit of 1,400 calories a day, which means you lose about 2.5 or 3 pounds, about a little over a kilo a week of body fat. And we show that with this pie chart here. And I do something different here because I show not just your dietary carbs, your dietary protein, and your dietary fat, but I show your body fat contribution. Because they all add up to what you're burning. So you're eating 1,400 calories a day, you're burning 2,800 calories a day, so this is 14 here and this is 1,400 here. So on your plate though, this would look like double the amount of protein because you're only, it's a smaller amount of food, so a higher proportion looks like it's protein. and a higher proportion looks like it's fat because you kind of invisible to you is this 50% that's coming from body fat. That results in weight loss. As you go through various phases, as you lose weight, naturally your metabolic rate goes down. You have less body tissue to support. You know, carrying around body fat is not a cheap date. Every time you move, you have to move it. And if you weigh 20 kilos less, if you drop from 200 to 160 pounds here, you're going to be burning less calories per day. But now you weigh 40 pounds less, you're getting somewhat closer to your goal, and so you tend to eat more because the signals in your body, you know, the appetite is designed to save your life. You're not supposed to be able to just will to weigh to nothing. Your appetite will begin to come on, you'll feel cravings. Don't increase your carbohydrate intake very much. Your weight loss slows down. But notice now the body fat contribution has become a very small amount. And if you're eating 2,100 calories a day and the body fat contribution is, now your dietary fat is expanding. You can only do this, and this is the right kind of progression, if you're willing to eat fat. Because when you get to maintenance, if you want to stay in nutritional ketosis, keep your carbs at or under 10%, your protein moderate 20%, you're going to have to teach yourself how, as part of your lifestyle, to eat the majority of your calories as fat. You're eating luscious food. I make salad dressings that are 70% fat and 25% either lemon juice or unsweetened vinegar, and I add flavorings to them. And people ask for the recipe when they come to my house to eat. It's safe to eat saturated fat. I showed you those data. Monounsaturates, which are, the saturates are red here. Monounsaturates are yellow. And that actually appears to be the body's preferred form of fuel when most of what is burning is fat. And I won't get into why I believe that to be true. But the ones that I was taught in medical school, the essential fats of the omega-6 family, yes, you need about a teaspoonful of this per day total from all the things that you eat. But if you eat most of your fat from I call them the big blues here. So safflower, sunflower, corn, soybean, peanut, and cottonseed oils. Those are the ones that are high in the omega-6. They will make you feel ill. How do I know that? Because when we did the study of my bike racers, we gave them their choice of either animal fats or chicken salad and tuna salad made with soybean oil. And when they ate the soybean oil-rich diets, they all just said, yuck, I don't feel good. And they stopped eating them. And you know, bicycle racers have cast iron stomachs. A little bit of this is vital, but too much of it will make you sick. And that's similar to a lot of the fat-soluble vitamins. You know, a certain amount of vitamin D is necessary for you. A certain amount of vitamin A is necessary. But if you overdose on A or D, it's going to make you sick. And the same with these. You need to stay away from them and choose which fats you eat. Just a typical kind of meal here and snacks that one can have. A simple breakfast, just take 4 sausages, and I'm not talking about hot dogs here. Nothing here is low fat. Well, not with one exception. So just a cup of black coffee. Some people like to put a little bit of butter on top of their coffees. For lunch, 2 fistfuls of green vegetables in a salad. I will typically use 4 or 6 ounces of water-packed tuna, and this is where the one exception I make in terms of not having the high-fat version, because at least in the United States, all the tuna packed in oil is packed in soybean oil. So I get the water-packed tuna, and then I add the fat as olive oil or full-fat yogurt in making a dressing, and I don't use a tablespoon of dressing, I use half a cup of dressing. This is a way of getting in the fat, because I've been stable now for close to 10 years on low-carb diet. My weight hasn't changed more than a few pounds, up or down. So nuts, broth is very important. I'll come back to that in a minute. You can have soft cheese and have that with vegetables, all kinds of luscious and simple snacks, and they're not expensive. Dinner can be a really luscious meal, including 4 ounces of ice cream. That's the good news. The bad news is you have to make it yourself, because nobody yet commercially makes a good tasting, true low-carb ice cream that's full fat. And again, this is a place where it's made with heavy cream and where I get some of the fats I need to keep me satiated and stable throughout the day. The tomato bisque, I make it from tomatoes that I grow in my garden at least half the year. And I use chicken broth as the base. So I have 2 servings of broth per day. One is a snack and one usually is a soup. It's a homemade soup. And the broth is actually, it's part of the traditional diet of many Aboriginal people, including the Inuit. If they boil the meat, they drink the broth. So if I have a chicken, we roast a chicken, we eat the chicken and the usual parts. I take the carcass, put it in a pot, boil it